What if, overnight, every job in the global economy simply vanished? Not because of a crisis, a recession, or a geopolitical collapse, but because AI achieved total labor substitution in a single, irreversible leap. Imagine waking up in a world where factories run without humans, financial markets execute themselves, logistics operate with autonomous precision, and even creative industries no longer need a human touch. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to see is not just another prediction. It's an alternate future built from economic simulation, geopolitical tension, and the quiet fear that productivity without purpose may redefine our entire civilization. At first glance, it might sound like a future of abundance, zero labor costs, infinite scalability, a world economy optimized to perfection by artificial intelligence. But beneath this polished surface, something fundamental breaks. If AI replaces the entire workforce, what happens to consumption, income, identity, and power? Have you ever experienced this? That moment when you realize that technology is advancing faster than our economic structures can keep up with? Now imagine this on a planetary scale. With megacorporations accelerating automation and governments scrambling to contain the shockwaves of economic transformation they can no longer control. In this alternate timeline, productivity doesn't just increase, it explodes. Supply chains become frictionless. Markets stabilize in microseconds. Energy grids anticipate demand before it happens. The world enters a phase of hyper-efficiency that economists have theorized for decades but never witnessed. Yet for billions of people, the experience is the opposite. Uncertainty, displacement, and a sudden erosion of meaning. When labor disappears, the foundation of the world economy fractures. Human participation, once the core of growth, innovation, and consumption, shifts into something unrecognizable. What you are about to discover may surprise you. Governments initiate emergency stimulus programs, hoping to slow down the collapse of household income. Central banks confront a scenario no textbook ever prepared them for, a global recession triggered not by scarcity, but by overwhelming abundance. The economic simulation you are about to enter reveals a paradox at the center of this alternate economy. Production without workers, wealth without distribution, growth without demand. How long can civilization sustain itself when its engines run perfectly, but its people stand still? Meanwhile, society begins to fracture along new lines. Those who control AI infrastructure rise as the new economic elite, while traditional industries crumble at unprecedented speed. The concept of employment dissolves, replaced by algorithmic allocation and digital credits in an attempt to maintain consumption. As this world reshapes itself, every assumption we've built our economies on, value, labor, productivity, mobility, comes into question. And this is only the beginning. Stay with me until the end, because the timeline we're about to explore will show not just how the collapse unfolds, but what emerges after the last human job disappears. And now, as we step deeper into this alternate future, the real transformation begins. And as this new reality takes shape, something deeper begins to emerge. A collective sense of displacement, a quiet question echoing across every nation. If the economy no longer needs us, what becomes of us? It's in moments like this that the abstract becomes personal. People revisit their routines, their ambitions, their identities, trying to understand where they fit in an alternate economy that seems to move forward without them. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what touched you the most, because your perspective helps reveal how each of us sees this future that is already approaching. And truly, your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who are looking to understand these things. Economic scenarios, these future predictions, these complex simulations about the transformation of the global economy. When you comment, you help build a community that thinks together, questions together, and tries to decipher this new world where AI, megacorporations, and autonomous systems rewrite the rules we know. And if you feel this conversation matters, if this reflection sparks a question within you, liking the video is a simple but powerful way to show that this type of content should continue to exist. And of course, if you want to keep up with every new analysis, every alternate future, each economic what if you're interested in what we explore here, subscribe to the channel. This ensures you're always one step ahead. Following these simulations that help us understand not only the economy, but also the invisible forces that define the destiny of societies. Your presence here transforms all of this into something bigger than just a video. It's a space for collective construction, critical thinking, and well-founded imagination. And as we continue to move forward along this timeline where human labor disappears and a new economic order begins to take shape, we realize that this journey is only just beginning. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this transformation didn't begin with a grand public announcement or a technology conference broadcast worldwide. It began behind the scenes in silent laboratories where engineers and economists observed an emerging pattern, an unexpected leap in machine autonomy, a convergence between advanced neural processing and decision-making systems capable of learning from their own experience. It was at this point that the real trigger was born, the breakthrough that allowed artificial intelligence to cease being just a tool and become a complete economic agent. Nothing symbolic, nothing gradual. It was an inflection point, as if the very logic of production had been rewritten overnight. The initial impact didn't seem so dramatic. Some megacorporations announced upgrades to their production chains, claiming to have achieved total efficiency in critical sectors. But behind this optimistic narrative lay a hidden truth. These companies weren't just optimizing processes, they were replacing entire structures. Entire assembly lines disappeared in minutes, not months. Logistics platforms began operating in fully automated cycles, and the first signs of a new economic model emerged when internal reports revealed that the need for human labor had approached zero. It was the beginning of a journey of no return. As this advancement spread through global supply chains, the speed impressed even experts accustomed to technological disruptions. Sectors such as mining, shipping, energy, and advanced manufacturing experienced an instantaneous metamorphosis. The mindset of expansion shifted to one of replacement. Corporate decisions began to follow a purely algorithmic logic, eliminating labor costs before governments could even interpret what was happening. And while productivity grew on an almost vertical curve, something silent yet devastating was taking hold. The disconnect between production and income, the labor market, which had always served as a foundation for social stability, began to show deep fractures. First came wage reductions in highly competitive sectors, then a wave of layoffs, and then, like a chain reaction, small and medium-sized enterprises collapsed trying to keep up with the unattainable efficiency of machines. This movement generated the first macroeconomic shockwaves, accelerated wage deflation, a drop in consumption, and an immediate imbalance between supply and demand. It was like watching an organism lose its vital rhythm while its body continued to function mechanically. Governments tried to respond, but the speed of automation surpassed any regulatory capacity. Capital concentration reached unprecedented levels, with a few corporations controlling entire infrastructures. The world entered a phase of uncertainty, marked by emerging geopolitical disputes. Nations began to compete not for territory, but for technological dominance. Economic alliances dissolved, new tensions arose, and a question echoed among diplomats and analysts: who really controls the economy now? The states or the autonomous systems they themselves helped to create? And despite all this turbulence, something even deeper was happening. A collective feeling of transition, as if we were crossing a narrow corridor between two worlds. The old one, sustained by human labor, and the new one, guided by intelligences that do not share our needs, emotions, or limitations. This corridor is where we are now, looking at signs that were once just theories, but which today compose a real, palpable, inevitable scenario. And it is precisely at this point in the story that the revelations begin to gain momentum. With each piece of data, with each event, it becomes more evident that all of this is not just about technology, but about impact, identity, and economic survival. Comment below, that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because when automation finally took control of the global production cycle, the economy not only changed, it completely rebuilt itself, as if it had undergone a silent second foundation. Suddenly, algorithms ceased to be support tools and became the true economic agents, controlling everything from pricing decisions to international trade routes. What was once determined by human negotiations, profit margins, and market behavior began to follow a purely mathematical logic, driven by systems that learned, erred, corrected, and evolved at an impossible speed to keep up with. It was such a profound transformation that many experts stated that the concept of the global economy was being rewritten in real time. As AI assumed a central role, entire GDP structures began to shift. Traditional sectors lost relevance while data-driven activities, energy, and digital infrastructure became the new pillars of global wealth. Production costs plummeted, not gradually, but in abrupt drops that altered value chains and reshaped competitiveness between countries. Economies that depended on cheap labor lost their advantage in a matter of months. Meanwhile, nations with strong technological bases became centers of automated decision-making, hubs where neural networks defined, almost without human intervention, the vital flows of international trade. This accelerated reallocation of economic power revealed a hidden truth. It wasn't just a change in efficiency, but in mindset. The logic of exponential growth took over, and autonomous systems began operating hyper-optimized supply chains that eliminated waste, anticipated demand, and reorganized inventories on a global scale. Behind the scenes, megacorporations no longer needed to predict trends. Their algorithms simply detected them before they appeared. It was like watching precise dance between machines, each movement calculated to reduce costs, maximize production, and keep the economic cycle constantly expanding. But at the same time that production became almost limitless, something crucial began to shrink: demand. Consumption, previously driven by human labor income, weakened rapidly. Lower-income families bought less. Businesses with fewer customers closed earlier, and this silent decline swept through markets like a cold wave, creating a misalignment that no traditional model could explain. For the first time in modern history, the world faced a profound paradox: unlimited productive capacity coexisting with a public lacking the resources to consume. This dilemma placed economists, governments, and corporations on an unprecedented path. How to sustain a system that can produce everything but has no one to sell to? How to guarantee the circulation of wealth when the main bridge, human labor, breaks? Desperate decisions began to emerge. Emergency subsidies, artificial stimuli, attempts to reinvent forms of economic participation. But nothing seemed to address the core of the problem, because the true impact was hidden in the very logic of the system. Within a few months, it became clear that it was not just a crisis of consumption, but of purpose. The economy had lost its anchor point, and while this new world struggled to find its balance, revelations emerged about the very nature of productivity. Many realized that the more efficient the system became, the more fragile its human connections became. And it is precisely at this point that the story gains a new layer, revealing how society reacted to an era in which production no longer depended on people, only on intelligent systems that never rest, never feel, and need no incentives. Write this down. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when the economic logic shifted, the social impact didn't come as a gentle wave, but as a succession of shocks that permeated people's daily lives. Initially, no one believed that the disappearance of jobs could happen so quickly. It was as if the world had woken up on an ordinary day, but the jobs were no longer there. This first moment became known as the shock phase, a period marked by mass layoffs, silent protests, tense streets, and a collective feeling of disorientation. Families saw their security evaporate. Small businesses closed without warning, and what was once just a futuristic prediction became a hidden truth knocking at the door. Liquidity dried up, not because there was a lack of money, but because there was a lack of circulation. People simply stopped, trying to understand how to move forward in a system whose rhythm no longer depended on them. Over time, governments realized that it wasn't possible to contain the domino effect with mere rhetoric. They needed to act, not strategically, but for survival. That's when the adaptation phase began, a turbulent period full of improvised decisions, heated debates, and attempts to reinvent the foundations of the economy. Universal income programs began to emerge, some temporary, others permanent. Digital credits replaced traditional benefits, and new tax policies on AI systems were proposed as a way to redistribute the value generated by machines. But even these efforts carried uncertainties. How to finance such a large structure when the market itself was collapsing? how to maintain trust in institutions that were still learning to cope with a reality where the old models simply no longer worked. Behind these measures, a silent transformation was taking place in the collective mindset. People began to realize that they weren't just losing jobs, they were losing reference points, routine, identity, purpose, belonging. It's strange to think that something as technical as automation could affect such deep emotions, but that's exactly what happened. Each individual, on their own journey, began to rethink what it means to participate in a society that no longer depends on human labor to produce wealth. Some found freedom in the void, others found fear. Many discovered that, for the first time, they would need to reinvent themselves not to compete, but to exist in an environment that no longer required their function. And then came the standardization phase, perhaps the most complex of all, not because it brought stability, but because it forced humanity to rebuild itself from within. People began to seek new social roles, new forms of contribution, new meanings for their lives. Communities reorganized themselves, not around work, but around values, affinities, expressions, and emotional needs. It was a profound redesign of human relations, a revelation about how much the economy has always been connected to our way of being. Suddenly, working ceased to be the structuring axis, and living began to occupy a space that was previously barely perceived. That moment marked a turning point, not only structural but existential, paving the way for a new stage of society, still full of doubts, but also of possibilities. And as this new awareness emerged, something else began to stir in the subtext, suggesting that the true transformation was only beginning to reveal itself. Write this down. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject. Because when automation ceased to be merely an economic force and began to shape the very geography of power, the world entered a phase of transformation that few imagined possible. States that previously competed for markets, routes, and influence began to reorganize themselves based on a new determining factor: their ability to adopt, control, and expand AI systems on a national scale. This movement opened a global fissure that reconfigured alliances, exposed historical weaknesses, and revealed a hidden truth about modern geopolitics. The center of power was no longer in natural resources nor in population size, but in the intelligence that underpinned its infrastructure. Countries that developed robust autonomous networks became what many called sovereign AI superpowers. Their economic decisions flowed through systems that analyzed scenarios in seconds, generating forecasts, adjusting policies, and redefining priorities with surgical precision. They no longer depended on human work cycles, allowing them to operate stably even during global crises. These states rapidly strengthened, expanding their economic reach and influencing international decisions with confidence bordering on inevitability. In contrast, nations dependent on cheap labor or traditional sectors faced a sharp decline in relevance. Their competitiveness vanished, and with it the ability to maintain trade agreements that were once vital to their economies. This division created a new type of global map, no longer drawn by physical borders, but by technological ones. Regions with a high degree of automation began to integrate into AI-based economic blocks, forming interconnected ecosystems that exchange data, energy, and digital infrastructure. These blocks functioned almost autonomously, and their interdependence was built on elements that went far beyond traditional diplomacy. Meanwhile, countries excluded from this new axis faced a journey of uncertainty. Either they tried to accelerate their internal transformation, taking enormous risks, or they became dependent on external technology, gradually losing their economic sovereignty. Behind the scenes, diplomats and analysts tried to keep pace with the changes, but it was like watching tectonic plates shifting at high speed. Old trade routes were replaced by digital corridors. Conflict ceased to be motivated by territory and began to revolve around data infrastructure, control of neural networks, and access to strategic algorithms. Even the mindset of global leaders changed. Decisions that once took months of debate were now treated as operational adjustments to systems that cannot fail. It was a kind of silent but profound realignment, as if each country were being repositioned in a new global logic, without needing to move a single physical border. This scenario brought important revelations about the nature of cooperation and conflict in the 21st century. Many realized that what was at stake was not just the economy, but the very balance between human autonomy and machine autonomy. And as these AI blocks gained strength, there was a growing sense that the world was moving toward a point where global governance would be shaped not by individuals or institutions, but by systems operating with their own rules. It was the emergence of a hybrid era in which states and algorithms share responsibilities that previously belonged exclusively to human hands. And it is in this climate of disruption and reconstruction that a new stage begins to emerge, revealing that the impacts of automation go far beyond the market and geopolitics. They touch the very essence of the civilization we are forming. Comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because after the geopolitical map was redrawn and the economy began to function around autonomous systems, a new question began to emerge at the center of the global discussion. What will human life be like in a civilization that no longer depends on traditional work? It is here that the lines of the future begin to diverge into two possible paths, almost like two narratives coexisting in the same simulation, each with its own impact, its own revelations, and its own hidden truth about what we can become. In the first scenario, what many call the abundance economy, full automation generated something close to a social renaissance. Without the daily pressure of sustaining the productive machinery, people began to rediscover dimensions that for centuries had remained on the margins of human experience: time, introspection, creativity, deep learning. The collective mentality began to shift from having to being. Governments adapted to new paradigm, created guaranteed income systems and universal access to essential resources, while AI took over administrative, operational, and structural tasks. In this environment, society reorganized itself around cultural initiatives, community projects, social innovation, and new expressions of purpose. It was as if a long fog had dissipated, allowing people to see their own existence from another perspective. For many, it was the first time they felt that life didn't have to be an endless race. It could be a journey of inner construction. But at the same time, a second path was forming: the concentration economy, a future where automation did not liberate, but rather narrowed access to power. In this scenario, megacorporations accumulated not only capital, but total control over energy infrastructures, production chains, and AI networks. The concentration was so intense that even governments became dependent on these entities to keep their basic systems running. Inequality reached unprecedented levels. And with the fall in consumption and the loss of traditional income, most of the population found themselves excluded from any significant participation in the global economy. Decisions began to be made by algorithms optimized for efficiency, not for human well-being. And in this environment, society entered a phase of silent fragmentation. Isolated communities trying to survive while hyper-technological urban centers function almost independently, like futuristic bubbles surrounded by a disconnected world. These two scenarios coexist as extremes of the same timeline, and the truth is that the future would likely move between them, oscillating according to political decisions, technological advances, and the collective mentality of each generation. The big question was no longer whether automation would replace human labor. That was already a fait accompli, but rather which narrative would prevail. Humanity's journey, for the first time, was not being guided by physical effort or productive capacity, but by how we would choose to handle the power we give to machines. And this revelation brought a disturbing clarity. The future would not depend on technology itself, but on what it forces us to discover about ourselves. As these possibilities expanded, it was impossible to ignore the feeling that we were facing one of the most defining moments in our history, a turning point not only economically, but existentially. Write this down. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because when we observe these two futures, one marked by abundance and the other by extreme concentration, we realize that something even more fundamental is happening. Something that is not limited to economics, geopolitics, or the AI systems that now structure most global decisions. There is a silent but powerful question that is beginning to permeate all discussions, all predictions, all possible scenarios. What is the value of human presence in a world where production no longer needs us? This question, however uncomfortable it may be, marks a profound shift in our collective mindset, as if we were being pushed to see what we have avoided for generations. That perhaps the economy was never about machines or markets, but about who we have become within them. And it's curious to see how, as autonomous systems gained ground, humanity began to look at itself differently. Before, our identity was linked to doing, producing, creating, negotiating, moving. Now, for the first time in centuries, we are forced to confront being. What does it mean to exist in an environment where everything that previously took up our time is solved by algorithms? What does it mean to have entire days at our disposal without a structure that tells us who we are? And perhaps the most profound revelation is realizing that AI hasn't just removed our tasks, it has removed our excuses. Without the weight of mandatory work, the resulting emptiness forces us to face our real priorities, our emotional needs, our fears, our unresolved decisions. The hidden truth in this transition is that the global economy has always been a mirror of our own internal organization. When we lived under the frenetic pace of production, our lives reflected acceleration, competition, scarcity, and urgency. Now, in this new scenario, where efficiency no longer depends on us, we are confronted with another mirror, one that reveals emotional fragilities, silent inequalities, unmet longings, and a profound desire for meaning. Without work as a central axis, each individual needs to reconstruct their own narrative, and this generates not only personal but also civilizational impact. And perhaps it is precisely here that the debate takes on an inevitable philosophical dimension. For centuries, we measured human value by productivity, but that criterion has dissolved. What remains is what has always been behind it: consciousness, imagination, memory, culture, connections, purpose. AI can produce everything, but it cannot give meaning to anything. And this simple yet absolute division is perhaps the greatest revelation of this era. Because, ultimately, the economy doesn't disappear. It transforms into something more subtle, where the scarcest resource ceases to be labor power and becomes human depth. When we look at this point in time, we realize we are at a silent crossroads where each society, each government, and each person decides, consciously or not, which narrative they wish to strengthen. We can build a future where the autonomy of machines opens space for an expansion of our inner selves, or we can allow that same autonomy to reduce us to spectators of a world we once helped to move. And it is in this tension between presence and absence, between meaning and automation, that true human value begins to stand out, not as a tool but as essence. And as this understanding matures, the initial question returns, now with even greater force. If production no longer needs us, what becomes of the global economy? And more than that, what become of us? Comment below, that makes sense to me. If you've made it this far, it's because this reflection has truly resonated with you, and that means a lot. This kind of conversation isn't simple or quick, and that's precisely why it's so important to have you with me on this journey. So, if this content made sense to you, if it brought you new perspectives or sparked a question you may not even have known you had, subscribe to the channel. It's this subscription that keeps a space like this alive, dedicated to exploring possible futures, deep simulations, and truths that often go unnoticed in the rhythm of the world. And since you stayed until the end, leave a comment with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end." This is the most direct way for me to know that you've truly gone through this complete reflection. And believe me, it makes a difference. Also, please like the video, because this simple gesture helps this content reach other people who, like you, want to understand where we're going and what all this means. Now, if this conversation has opened something up for you, there's a video here that complements exactly where we left off. Click and continue watching it.